So how significant might tomorrow's fiscal lay of the land be? Bill Morneau served as Minister of Finance from 2015 to 2020. Mr. Morneau, pleasure to welcome you back to the show. Thanks for making the time.
It's good to be on the show, Vashi. Happy to be with you this morning.
I wanted to start off on the concept of those fiscal anchors. As I mentioned there, that the finance minister did signal that one of them would be met, but the other one around the deficit, which was to keep it under $40.1 billion, it sounds like that's not going to happen. In your view, is there a consequence to setting a parameter and not meeting, and if there is meeting it rather, and if there is a consequence, what is it?
I think the broader issue is, we obviously need to be fiscally responsible and to make investments in the places that we know are going to create long-term positive economic outcomes. So that's really what I'm most focused on, and not on, any specific measure. I'm not paying as close attention to that, much more on the quality of the spending, how we're responding in the short term to the real issues that we have south of the border, and in the long term, dealing with our real challenge around growth.
So let me ask you, I'll ask you about tariffs in a second, but when you talk about sort of the quality of the spending, if you were to identify some things that you think do deserve investment, do deserve, more spending on, or some spending on, or initiatives around, what is it?
Well, in the immediate term, we've clearly got some interests that we need to focus on. We need to focus on border security. We need to make sure that we've shored up those challenges to ensure that those discussions with the Trump administration will go well. We need to think about our long-term challenge in a more challenging geopolitical environment to focus on how we can ensure that we have the defense expenditures that are going to protect us and protect our broader challenges, especially in the north. So I think those things are really important in the shorter term. In the longer term, how are we going to encourage the private sector to invest more? So finding ways to encourage that investment is critically important. And that'll be the sort of things that I'm watching for.
So what about, I think some of those things in particular, I would say around border security, we are anticipating is a part of this. We also know something else in the immediate term they've pursued is this GST holiday, as well as writing checks. Is that fiscally smart from where you sit?
Those things, we do have to recognize that people are feeling challenged with the level of prices. So coming out of the pandemic, increases in prices have been real, and they are challenging for people. For me, those sort of short-term measures, though, they're not what's going to get at the more important challenge. How do we grow the economy? How do we make sure that that growth is shared in such a way that people feel more optimistic about their future? That's really what I'm interested in. And in that regard, short-term measures, they're just not going to have the same impact that I'm seeking.
You mentioned south of the border, and I think that Canadians are well familiar now with the threat that Donald Trump has levied to impose a 25% blanket tariff on all imports. The first question I have for you on that is, if you were still finance minister, how worried would you be about the prospect of that?
I think we need to be very worried, but we also need to recognize that the way to deal with it is to focus on our interests. And our interests are about recognizing the long-term positive relationship and trying to make sure that that is forefront in our mind, and do the things that we know are in the best interests of Canada and in the best interests of that relationship. And so that's why I focused on things like border security and defense spending, but also when thinking about ways that we can ensure that that relationship will be strong. We don't need to look at places like the digital sales tax that can inflame differences between our country. We need to think about places where we can work together. So we need to be prepared so that we can actually do the things that are going to recognize our mutual interests and move forward rapidly.
Would you be taking the DST off the table and digital sales tax for everyone watching off the table as sort of a sign of goodwill in the negotiations around all this?
I think we need to look at the places where we are able to respond to really important challenges that have been identified, things that we understand. With the digital sales tax, I don't see why that's an issue that we need to be focused on now. It will certainly create tensions, and it's not something that we've got an agreement with on the United States yet, so it's unilateral from a Canadian standpoint. So yes, I would move away from that and think about the other places that we have a mutual interest in moving forward. And do that in a way that's calm and that recognizes that we need to have an enduring ability to work together.
Do you think, does that mean you would not advise at this point threatening, cutting off energy, imposing significant counter tariffs, or even export tariffs on things like uranium and potash?
I would be very careful. I would be very careful in thinking about that. The reason we put reciprocal tariffs on, if we remember back in 2018, was because we recognized that at that stage, the Trump administration was going into a re-election campaign. They were actually concerned with how they were going to go out to Americans to present themselves the next go round. We're not at the same time period right now. We're in a different period where this administration is coming in. They want to make some important changes from their perspective, and it's their perspective that they're bringing forward. I think we need to work with them collaboratively, think about the places that we can make changes in our own interests, and not react quickly in ways that will inflame tensions.
I got to ask you before I let you go, Mr. Mourneau, one political question, because I was reading the paper this week. I don't know if you were having the same feeling, with a bit of a sense of deja vu. Lots of headlines in the Globe and Mail about tension over spending between the finance minister and the prime minister's office. I remember similar articles 4.5 years ago reporting between yourself and the prime minister's office. Is it sort of normal for that tension to exist, or is there something in that tension Canadians should take from it?
Well, there should be tension. There should be tension between the finance department and the prime minister's office, because what the finance department is trying to do is to make sure that we are investing appropriately, but that we're also fiscally responsible. So that is that responsibility rearing its head. So I would expect that. I think what's clear to us right now is that the level of expenditure that we've had during the Chrétien Martin years, during the Harper years, during the first 4 years while I was in office in the Trudeau government, those levels of expenditure have been eclipsed now in the post-pandemic period. So I think that the level of tension is likely to be higher because of our situation, and we need to be careful to have the fiscal capacity to do the things that are going to be important, both in the immediate term around dealing with the Trump possibility of tariffs, and the longer term to ensure that we're focused on economic growth that can benefit all Canadians.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Mourneau, a pleasure to get your analysis as always. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Vashi. Take care.